that we're going to work with, and we're going to look at what are the problems with printing them and some of the things that I do so that I can take a look at and make better decisions and choices. This particular image I shot in Cuba, and the way that this image happened was I was driving in a car. I had one of the prototype D5s, and as we were driving, I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Stop the car!" The taxi driver didn't know what to do, stopped, and I photographed this moment. Now, the issue with this image is that it has extraordinary color because, as the gentleman from Cuba can attest, the colors pretty much look like this everywhere. And the issue at hand, if we look at this image, is that this is all of the color that is in the image. As you can see, that's a lot of color. So let's take a look at what the different color spaces look like. This is Profoto. And you'll forgive me, my computer is being a little finicky. And so if we look at Profoto, Profoto is big enough. Actually, there are some colors that fall out of Profoto's color space in this image. Now, the issue that we would have would be that the monitor sees this, and as you can see, there's way more color in this image than that my laptop can see. And this is Adobe RGB. And again, there's way more color in this image than Adobe RGB can contain. So what would occur is that the colors in this image would posterize if we're using relative colorimetric rendering intent, which is the better rendering intent to use. So you get big blotchy color in the picture. The secret to the success of my images is a combination of the following things: the calibration of my monitor, the choice of using the paper and ink in the printer that I use Epson printers, and a proper paper profile, which is hard to say fast. The best profiles are profiles that are printer specific. And so if you're in the advanced amateur mode or you're working with wanting to go to the next level, the biggest bang for the buck, in my opinion, is what I'm going to show you, which is the Color Monkey photo, which it kind of looks like a tape measure, is the best way to describe it. The beauty of this device, and I travel with one of these wherever I go, is that I can calibrate a monitor, I can calibrate a projector, and I can calibrate a printer. So if I'm in a workshop or I'm in a situation where I have to print on a job, what I can do is I can fine-tune my profiles to my images, because that's another thing that you can do. You can do something called an iterative profile. And what an iterative profile is where you take the colors of the profile, of the image, and then you produce a profile that is attenuated specifically for that image. The advantage here is greater and tighter control. And where it matters the most is it matters the most with printers that are not hardware calibrated but are software calibrated. The prosumer printers, the printers that are designed for advanced amateur prosumers, 95% of the people who print. I print the vast majority of my images on those type of printers, in that all my 13 by 19 and all of my 13 by 19 black and whites get printed on the P600 and P800. Why? Because it's quicker, it's faster, and it fits the right footprint of my studio because space is tight. So what happens here is I have an image like this, and I have a color space like this, and the actual signature of the image is this. So even though I have a profile that I've made specific to the image, the problem here is that the color of this image falls outside of the gamut of this image. And I will lose color and I will have just a bad print. Now, the ultimate outcome of everything I do is the print. When I visualize an image, I visualize the print. A print to me is far more beautiful thing to look at than something on an iPad, an iPhone, or a laptop. The print is something that's going to outlast me. So I want to make something that is the best of me. I want to make something that I'm proud to put on the wall. And it's such a quick fix to do. So let's take a look at this image in Adobe RGB. So if we look at what this image's color looks like, give me 1 second to refresh. This is what the image looks like in Adobe RGB. Again, I've converted this image to Adobe RGB, and the printer cannot print the color that the image contains. So the way that I want to work at this point is I want to create an image-specific profile. And so what I've done here is exactly that. So give me a second for the monitor to refresh. And if we turn off this, what we'll see is that the printer profile more reflects the colors of the image. So what I can do is I can get a better rendition of what this image contains. Now, how you do this is fairly straightforward. So let's go take a look at how to do this. The first thing that you do is you click on Print My Profile. The next thing that you do is you click on the printer that you want to use. In this case, it's going to be the Epson SC P800 series printer. And the way that I work is I go _CM, that tells me Color Monkey Profile. Then I name the printer P800. Then I go _ the paper type. In this case, it's Epson Legacy _Platine. And then what I will do here is type in the resolution that I'm going to print at, which is 2880. Click Next. What you're going to see is this dialog box. You want to click on Continue, and you want to go to Printer Settings. So for page setup, standard. For paper type, in this instance, I'm going to pick Legacy Platine. This tells the printer what type of ink laydown it should do. It's very, very important. For color mode, what I'm going to pick here is off, no color management. I'm going to select 2880 DPI and I'm going to turn high speed off. I then hit print. The printer will then print the profile, and since I've already printed this out, what I'm going to do is hit Next, and the Color Monkey will give me one of two test charts, and what it will read when you look at it is it will look Color Monkey Epson SC P800 series, the name of it, the date that it was taken, and it will say first test chart. Okay. Let me show you how fast you can build one. So what I'm going to do here, let's go back, next, is click on the button, making sure that I start on the white. Let me show you if you make a mistake. So if I move this around, you see where I get a red square or red rectangle around it? It tells me that I did not cross the profiles correctly. So I have my first profile, or first run making my profile. So it's going to generate that, and it will give me this. I'll hit print, continue, repeat the same process, making sure that off is set. And if you want, you can also save this as a default setting should you choose to. So let's do this. Let's call this CM Platine Profile. Click OK, and that will have saved everything that I've set up here. Hit print, and then it will print a second set of patches. Now, what you want to do, and this is important, but since I've already made these, I don't have to do that, is you want to allow the profile to dry, and there's a built-in timer. But for this experiment, we can skip that process. Click Next, and you see I have a second set of colors, a second target that's a different set of colors. Now again, what I'm going to do with the color monkey is produce the second profile, or the second test chart on our first profile. Now it's going to ask me to save this, and I'm going to click Save. I'm going to click right here, configure my applications to automatically apply my new profile, and hit Finish. Now, what I can now do is, you see where it says Optimize Existing Profile. I can click here. I can choose the printer profile. So let's select the one that we just did. And then I can load an image. Now the way that I work in my workflow, I'm going to show you something else too. I have a test chart that I do because I build a library of what papers look like with images and a test target, and I can look at what different profiles do with this, and I'll show you that in a second. When I'm doing something like this, I will tend to put my images, what I'm working on the desktop. And what I want you to see is I want you to see the actual status of my desktop. My desktop is fairly uncluttered. The reason why it's got a little bit of clutter here was setting up for this. So let's show you what a desktop should look like. What I do is I create a folder called Desktop, and I put everything in that. Notice that I have a neutral gray background, and I have a step wedge. I built this target, and if there's a way to do this, I'll be more than happy to provide it for X-Rite to let you have. Is what you always want to do is you want to have as little clutter as possible on your desktop, and you want to have it be a neutral gray. And the reason why you want to have it be a neutral gray is so that when you're looking at an image, no matter what you're looking at, when you're looking at it, it's always in a gray background. Gray is for color. It's so that I can make decisions about color, because if I go to black, you notice that the contrast of the image pops up. And the reason for this is because screens are transmissive. They radiate light. If I were to have this just be the black screen, and I was standing in a room with absolutely no light, I would still be able to illuminate the room. That's because the screen is transmissive. It sends out light. That actually the black of this monitor that you're looking at, the blackest black that can be produced is in reality when the computer is turned off. That black is caused by creating contrast. It's an optical illusion. So that isn't actually black, because black is the absence of all light, and this monitor is radiating light. So that means that prints have a tendency to appear lighter on the screen and darker in print. And the reason why that is, unless you use a profile and unless you're calibrated, your monitor is calibrated, is because prints are reflective. They they don't transmit light, they absorb light and bounce it back. So if we were standing in a completely dark room and I held up a print, we'd be completely in the dark. So with that said, it is very important to be able to have a profile and to have an understanding of what that profile does. So what I have created is a test chart, a way in which to look at things and make a print and see what it is that happens to the profile, to the print, and what it looks like on paper. And the way to do this, the way that I do this is, let's go to image 1. Is I will pick a image that has skin tone in it for color and an image that has a very good grayscale. So I'll have one with people, one with a landscape. Then I'll produce another one in which I have a grayscale image of a landscape and a color image, or a grayscale image of people and a color image of a landscape. But for this test, we're going to take a look at just this one for brevity's sake. What I will then do with this is here in text, I will type in printer. In this case, it's going to be the P800. The resolution, 2880. Color monkey. And the paper type. And sometimes we have to abbreviate. So now in this profile, what it is, or in this test chart, what it is that I know is I know the printer type, the resolution, and I have images to look at. Now let's look at what's in this. What I've created is a gradiated chart over here that has all the numbers from 0, pure black, all the way to 76% black or white, all the way up to 100% white. So I go from 0 to 100%. So what you can see is a grayscale ramp in percentages of color, of gray. The next target over here is something called a Granger. And what this does, in the way in which this is set up, is if you look at the blend mode, I set the blend mode to color, and I set my grayscale gradient ramp to black. So what happens is that when I introduce a profile, this will shift and it will tell me what the profile is doing. So what you're looking at right now is you're looking at this in Profoto. If I were to come here into Window or View, Proof Setup, Custom, why is it that whenever you do a presentation in front of a lot of people, technology decides that it is going to act up? Is there some sort of like law that says, you know, like Murphy's Law, except for computers? There we go. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select, let's look what Adobe RGB looks like. Do you see how that shifted? So that tells me what the different color spaces look like. So this is Profoto. Oh boy. Refresh. As you can see, I suffer from something called profile-itis. This is the profile I just made. Now do you see how that color shifted again? This is the profile specific for the image. And this is what there we go. Now there are other things in this dialog box that you should pay attention to. One is called, we call them the ugly buttons. Simulate paper color, simulate black ink. And what this is designed to do is to give you some idea of what is actually going to happen to this image based on what the profile looks like. So let's take a look at this profile with simulate paper color, simulate black ink. Now what you should see is that there wasn't much shift here because the new ink set is such that it exceeds Adobe RGB. So since we are in, for this image, Adobe RGB, and we're looking at the profile generated for this image, you can see that this image is capable of, or this profile is capable of giving me a good amount of color. If we look at the grayscale ramp, we can see that based on our soft proofing, here in this part of the image, I have detail which correlates to, at a 4% ink density, I now have detail, which is extraordinary. So I can print, actually 2%, I can print all the way into what is basically zone 1, with this being pure black ink or black ink of paper, and on this new ink set, that's an L star count of 2. What does that mean? L is in LAB means luminance. An L star count of 2 is theoretical. 0 is the absence of all light. 1 is a theoretical, and 2 is amazing that we can attain that. Why does that matter? Because the better black gradation you have, the better color you'll have and the better gradations throughout your color, because it is the black that adds the density to the image. It's the black that adds the depth to the color, and it's the blacks in the ink set that cause the gradient of color. And if we look at this here, causes this gradation to occur. It causes it to be smooth. Now, when you build a test chart like this, and this is the test chart that I provide whenever to my students when I teach, I give them the blank for this, is that you want to pick images that you know intimately, that you know so well that when you look at them, you can tell if something is off with the image because you have printed it. For me, I chose this image because this image is skin tone. Let's go back to this here. If we look at this image's skin tone, there we go. That's all of the color in this image. Let's take a look at Adobe RGB. So what we're looking at here is, as you can see, I have color that falls out of the gamut of this image. So if I turn off the Profoto version of it, do you see how now all of the color falls within the gamut of Adobe RGB? So this is Adobe RGB. One second to refresh. And this is Profoto RGB. And as you can see, I have color that is out of gamut. Now, there is a lot of conversation about when to use Profoto, when to use Adobe RGB, when to use SRGB. And there are those that say that you should never print in anything but Adobe RGB or Profoto RGB, and there are those that say you should only print out of Adobe RGB, and those that say that SRGB is all the color space that you need. So let's take a look at, and again, if we look here, so you can see where my skin tones are out of gamut. Let's look at when you would choose to use a color space. For people, I tend to print out of Adobe RGB, and the reason for that is that if we look at the Adobe RGB version of this image and turn off the Profoto RGB version of this image, you can see that all of the colors are contained within this color space. Now, for sake of argument, let's make one more version of this image so that we can see it. Create in the way in which from one profile or one color space to the next color space to the next color space. The direction, the only direction that you can go is downward. So it's Profoto to Adobe RGB, Adobe RGB to SRGB, or Profoto to SRGB. You cannot go up. And the reason being is that as you contract the color space, you're throwing away color. So if you go to a small color space and then you put it back into a bigger color space, it would be like having a bucket of water, pouring it into a cup, and then taking the cup of water and pouring it back into the bucket. You would not fill the bucket. So what we're going to do is we're going to click Convert to Profile. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. And we're going to convert this to SRGB. And we're going to take a look at it. Now, the thing that you want to make sure that you do in all of your color management setup is you want to make sure that you select in Photoshop Adobe Color Engine, or ACE. You want to be in relative color metric, and you always, wherever you see this, always click Use Blackpoint Compensation. One of the most inspired algorithms ever written was this. What this does and why this matters is if you have a paper based on looking at this chart where you only see separation starting here, let's say, but the image contains detail starting here, what Blackpoint Compensation will do is it will look at the profile and say, ah, I don't start showing separation of detail until 14%, but I have image detail at 2%. I'm going to move all of this detail here and start my separation of detail here. Blackpoint Compensation moves the black point so that you get all of the information that is to be had in the image. Now let's save this here. And we'll call this underscore SRGB. Now another habit, very good habit to get into, is always give your file names a meaningful name and always give the layers in your files meaningful names. The reason for that and why that is important is that a year from now, layer 16 or curve adjustment layer 5 has no meaning. But should you decide to come back and should you decide that you need to work on the image, knowing what's in there is important. Knowing what the order is important. Knowing that this is the SRGB file is important. Now, the other thing that happens that's important is that you go color space to color space in 16-bit, and once that's done, then you would go down to 8 bits per channel. There's also argument as to what is important, 16-bit versus 8-bit. Does it matter? I tend to leave my images in 16-bit because if it gives me a 2% quality increase, I am going to do it. When I save to the web, I save at 8 bits, but for printing, I tend to leave my images at 16-bit. Whether or not it matters or not is not an argument that I think is something I want to engage in. The fact that it might matter and that I want every possible quality advantage that I can get is the general reason why I will tend to do something. If it gives me a 2% quality increase, I will do it. There are those that tell me that 8-bit doesn't matter, and there are those that tell me that they can see the difference between 16-bit. Okay, there are enough people that tell me that 16-bit matters. There's enough people that tell me that 8-bit matters to the point where I'm going to err in the direction of being conservative here. Because the negative is everything, but the print is all, to paraphrase Ansel Adams. That the file is the sheet music, but the print is the symphony. So if I have more notes, if I have more information, I believe that, and my images prove this out, I can make a better looking image. Now, when do you use Profoto and why do you want to work in Profoto? Okay, let's take a quick look here at Profoto as a color space. You see how big that is versus Adobe RGB. Do you see how much bigger that is? So Profoto is much bigger than Adobe RGB. The reason why I want to work in Profoto is if we look at this image here in the Profoto color space, and let's turn off this image, and let's just look at all the colors of this image fall within Profoto. But as we've seen, if we look at Adobe RGB, all of the colors of this image do not fall within Adobe RGB. Now, why does this matter? It matters most with skin tone. And the reason why it matters with skin tone is the color range that we as human beings know the best. So if something is off with that skin tone, the entire picture will appear to be off. We know what skin tone is supposed to look like. But with landscape, with the Cuba image, for example, what we know is we don't know that those colors are actually accurate. We just know that they are a blue. We know that they are a red. We know that they are a yellow. And those colors in this image, because we're not aware of the environment we're in, we can let them be fantasy color. That printing out a Profoto will give us more color volume. This tends to be the way in which I print my landscapes, my sunsets, because I have never in my life seen a sunset, nor do I want a sunset that looks as pastel as it did when I photographed it. I tend to want to have a little more color volume. When I photograph flowers, I tend to want to have more of the color apparent. So those images I tend to print in Profoto, and the reason being is that I want bigger than life color. That color accuracy is not necessarily what I'm after as an artist, but color pretty, the beauty of it, the beauty of what is capable, the interpretation of my experience, what it felt like to me to look at. Those are the things that matter most. So those are the things that I will print in Profoto. The reason why I want to work in Profoto is that any artifacting that's going to happen to the image will happen outside of the color gamut that I can print in, the color space that I can print in, so that what I can do is I can minimize artifacting. If there's really one takeaway from this conversation, the most important concept to take away is that all artifacting is cumulative and it may be multiplicative. This, for me, was one of the big epiphany moments in my career when I finally understood what that meant, and it wasn't a literary event but a reality. The thing to keep in mind, that anytime you do something to an image, you are clipping data. And anytime you clip data, you are introducing artifact. And anytime that you introduce artifact, you have two aspects of artifacting that are occurring. Accumulation, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, so on. And multiplication, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, so on. You want to negate multiplication artifacting, and you want to minimize accumulation artifacting. So one of the best ways to do that is to work in a Profoto color space. One of the best ways to work when working is to produce an image and then to be able to make decisions about it by doing something called soft proofing. So what you wind up having is you wind up having a profile that is specific to the signature of your printer, that is something that you can observe on your calibrated monitor, so that what you see on the monitor becomes what it is that you print. One of the things that you can do here is that you can create iterative profiles. What that means is profiles that are image specific, that they are based on the colors of the image, not of all of the colors in the profile. And in so doing that, what occurs is that you get a more accurate print of your interpretation of what the image should look like. What I do is when I make an iterative profile, and as you can see here, so let me bring this up, is I suffer from acute profilitis. And what profilitis is, in a second as my finicky laptop comes back up, is we look at profiles. Let's start at the top, shall we? Here are all the profiles that I have just in my laptop. Now these are all the printers that I have in my studio or have worked on or that I work with, and that all of my custom profiles that I have made tend to be down here. The reason why I do that, I put an underscore, in this case 2 underscores, on the bottom is so that I know exactly where to go to find all of my profiles, so that I'm not fishing through this list of profiles that I have to find. Now this looks daunting. Here's the secret to success. So you've made an iterative profile. If you're on a Mac, if you hold the Option key, go to the Go menu, click Library, what will happen is your library folder will come up. If you go to ColorSync Profiles, as you can see, my custom profiles are right here. What I will then do is I will take this profile and I will put it in the folder that contains the image, all of the work files, and the sized images, and I will have that all be in the same place, so that when I decide to print this with my iterated profile, what I can then do is I can then go back to the profile, put it back into the folder, make the print, and then discard it. So that what occurs is that I don't have as many profiles in my Profile ColorSync folder as I have profiles. So I think it's at this point I am supposed to take questions, and so let me get to wherever that is. There we are. Okay, so what questions do you have that I can help make you or help you make better prints? How can I better serve you in answering questions that you need to optimize your images?
Vincent,
Okay.
do you have access to the questions? I can call out the questions for you, and you can respond.
Okay. I don't seem to have. Wait here. There are questions. There we go. I don't seem to have access to the questions. I only have access to the questions from the last webinar.
Okay, so, well then why don't I call out the questions for you, so let's see, there's a question here from Shannon. And she wants to know, when using third-party papers, how do you test media types?
So let me see. So what do I think about third-party papers and how do I test media types? What I'll do is frequently paper manufacturers will have sample packs, or I'll buy a pack of paper that interests me that I look at. I'm always looking at papers. And how I test papers is exactly this right here. What I do is I will produce, using this test chart, a print of images that I know intimately, and this target so that I can see what the profile is doing, and I look at it and I make decisions based on that. The papers that I like to use are Legacy Platine, Cold Press Natural, and I am beginning to like very much the etching. I have some images that look gangbusters on etching. Cold Press Natural to me is one of my favorite papers, and Legacy Platine currently is my most favorite paper. I'm not a big fan of glossy or semi-glossy papers for my color work, but I have to tell you that that is the first paper that has turned my head around my neck back looking forward. So the answer to the question, to clarify, is I produce a test target like this. I go out and get a box of paper, the smallest amount, and I will make 2 prints on the paper to take a look at it, so that what I have is one where I have skin tone and color and landscape and grayscale, and then skin tone and grayscale and landscape and color, so that I can make judgments about that. And these are images that I know intimately well, and the more colorful the image, the better the image. Next question.
Is from Perry Rooks. He wants to know, are all of the profiles, calibrations, and paper settings coming from the ColorMonkey photo software?
Run that by me again. You cut out.
Oh, sorry. So I think in relation to the profiles and the calibrations and paper settings that you have been showing, are they all coming from the ColorMonkey photo software?
The profile is coming from the ColorMonkey software. The printer settings are coming from the Epson printer driver. Or if you were to use another printer driver, it would be the printer driver that would set up those settings. What you want to make sure that you do when you build a profile is to turn off all color management, so that what you're getting is the straight output of ink with no attenuation for the signature or wobbles or delta E of the printer, delta E meaning degree of error, so that what you get is what the printer does, and that the profile makes a profile specific to the peccadillos of that individual device. And the way, in a simplified way, the way that this works is, let's use monitor calibration because that's an easier way to describe it. So you have the device on the monitor. The software sends up a known color, so it'll send up 255 red, and the device measures that, and what it says is your red is actually 234 red, 14 green, and 3 blue. Okay, so the software denotes that, and then it sends up something again, so it says, how about this? And it attenuates out those colors, and the device reads that and goes, ah, this is what the signature of the paper is. This is 255 red. And so it builds a profile in which it changes the way in which the ink is laid down in such a way that the profile generates colors that match the known color values of the software and the calibrating device, so that what you see on the monitor is what you get when you make a print. Because if you work with a non-calibrated monitor and you work with non-profiled papers or papers that are not profiled specific to your device, this is what occurs. I have an image that contains blues, magentas, and reds. We don't know how accurate this is. We just know that this is a blue, this is a magenta, and this is a red. We don't know that it's the red that the camera photographed. We don't know that's the red that we saw. We just know that it is a red. What calibration provides is that the red you saw and the red that you work on will be as close to one and the same as one can get, and that the red that you print is the same red that you're looking at on the monitor as close as one can get. Because there are differences in monitors and printers. For example, I have a monitor that sees in color match RGB on a laptop. I have another monitor that sees in Adobe RGB on my desktop. That's great. I have a printer that prints 106% of Adobe RGB. So I still have more color than the monitor can see. So I need to be able to make decisions based on what it is that I see, which is why when it comes to skin tone, I tend to always print out of Adobe RGB, because what I'm looking at in the monitor is what it is that I want. Now, with regards to having 6% more color volume in the ink set than the monitor can provide, those colors tend to fall in this range right here. And they tend to fall in this range right here. That's great. Those are sunsets, and these are all of the pretty colors that we like, the vibrant blues and pulling into some of the magentas. Okay, those colors tend to be pretty, and we tend to like them. And so I will print out of Profoto RGB with my profile, because the profile is contained in the Profoto color space. Let's take, actually, let me do one thing here. I downloaded this from Wikipedia, and I'm supposed to give, and rightfully so, credit to Wikipedia for providing this particular target or this chart. So let's open up this and take a look at it. Oh, this laptop is in serious need of some system maintenance. One of the downsides of traveling as much as I do is X-ray machines at airports. The single greatest wear and tear on an image or on a computer is X-ray. All right, so let's look at this. This is the shape of visible color, this little horseshoe here. This is all the color that the human eye can see. This is what Profoto can see. This is what Adobe RGB can see, and this is what SRGB can see. Now, what's interesting when you look at this, okay, is you should notice that on this bottom part of the triangle, Adobe RGB and SRGB are the same. And they share, for a goodly part, two of the three tri-stimulus values. It isn't until you get into the greens and yellows that Adobe RGB contains more color volume than sRGB. If you notice that this tends to be in skin tone. Now, the reason why sRG basically exists is that that is the color space of monitors, and it was designed to give a good look, a realistic look to skin tone when looking at a monitor. Okay, when would you print out of sRGB should be the next question. When you're using a chemical printer like a Poli printer or Durst Lambda, when you're going to Costco to do, if you're doing portrait social, you would print using that color space. So I think I digressed, but I think that that was an important answer to a question that wasn't asked. Okay. Next question.
I have several questions regarding how this workflow compares to your black and white workflow. We know that black and white imagery is one of your specialties, and so there's a lot of interest in understanding more about your workflow with black and white compared to the color, particularly in terms of custom profiles for printing.
Or my bailiwick, as it were, black and white. My greatest love of photography, in photography, black and white. All right, so let's say what you do is, there was no such thing in the silver days, the traditional silver days, as a black and white print. Because of the different chemicals involved in making silver paper, nothing was dead nuts neutral. You picked papers based on what you wanted. I printed on Portriga, Agfa Portriga, and what that was that was a warm tone paper, and depending on how I mixed my developers, and I used either ethol LPD or I did something called Dr. Beer's two-solution process where you separated out elon and hydroquinone and you built up the image. Depending on how you mix the concentration would determine what the image would have with regards to a specific type of tonality. Then you would bring that over to selenium toning, and if you left a little bit of orbit bath, which was the decontamination or the neutralizing bath to get the developer and fixer out, and you left a little bit of the orbit bath impregnated in the paper, when you selenium toned, you could create almost a natural looking skin tone out of a paper only capable of producing a grayscale. So we picked papers and we had our development processes based on specific types of tonalities that we liked. Now, this I think matters a bit more for people who don't have an Epson printer than those that do, in that if I come up with a signature tonal range, a specific color I want things to look, what I can do is create the profile for the paper and then iterate out of that profile the colors that I have mixed in my post-processing software. So for me, I do the majority of my post-processing in Photoshop. I use the camera manufacturer's raw processor to produce a TIFF, and then I go from that TIFF into Photoshop. When I do use a custom profile for black and white prints, what I will do is I will iterate a profile based off of the color tonality that I have built into the black and white image. Again, if color management matters most, it matters most with regard to black and white. Now, what do I use for my black and white? I would say that 85% of my black and whites are printed using the Epson black and white printer driver. The other 15% of my images use iterated profiles that I generate the way in which I've shown you. Now, I use a more robust color management system, which is an ISIS, and its ability to make a 6400 patch test that I then iterate colors out of. But when I'm in the field, the device that I carry, the device that is in my camera bag, is a color monkey. When I teach printing, the device that we use to build profiles specific to the printer and specific to the prints is a color monkey. Here's the thing about it. I was employee number 2 of a company called Nick Software, and they created a piece of technology called Silver Effects Pro. Then they came out with Silver Effects Pro 2. The reason why we never saw Silver Effects Pro 3 was that there was nothing to improve upon. That any of the improvements that could be done, the things that we observed after the software was developed, didn't warrant a full revision, a 3.0. What they were was a 2.2 or 2.3 revision. And when I look at the Color Monkey, it's one of those devices that, for what it does and what it is something where, are there things that could be tweaked? There are always things that could be tweaked. That's the whole journey of life and progress. But it's a device that withstands the test of time. And it's a device that I carry with me, and I travel a lot, and computer bag space and camera bag space is at a premium. As airlines contract how much gear I can bring with me and up the price on how expensive it is to bring anything over the weight limits, I have to make decisions as to what it is that I'm going to bring. And one of the things that I always carry with me because of its versatility is that device. That's the best recommendation that I can give, is that what I'm showing you is something that I actually use in the field. And with regard to black and white, if it matters most, iterated profiles matter the most, I feel, with chromatic grayscale images, because there is more detail that can be pulled out. One of the reasons why I didn't show you this is that in ColorThink, when I drop a chromatic grayscale image on it, because of where the image lies, it just hangs on the center spline of the rotational model. you see where this L is? The issue, and let's bring up our profile manager, is that if I turn off all of these profiles with my incredibly cooperating computer, all it will do is there's a center axis here. All they do is it just hangs out here. You can't actually tell the way in which you can tell here what's going on with the chromatic grayscale image, but you can see it in the print. And ultimately, it comes down to the print. Ansel Adams, I think, said it best. The greatest photographers in the world will always be the best printers, but the best printers are not necessarily the greatest photographers. If you want to up the game in your photography, you have to make a print, because the print shows you everything that needs to be improved in what it is that you're striving for, which is to produce a piece of art that is the best of you. Think about it. What's going to outlive you? What's going to outlast you? What is the thing in which you leave behind that says, this is the way I spiritually saw the world. This is what moved me. So I want to leave behind the best of me. I've always been a believer of that you live forever if people see what it is you saw when you lived. In that moment, they travel back in time and look at the moment that moved you, that you have taken a slice of of time and created a decisive moment that took you to the point where you wanted to capture the image, and not only capture the image, but to spend the time and effort to produce an image that when you look at, it's like putting sunglasses on a very bright day, that when you look at that image, your heart goes, ah. And for me, that is a print. And the best way to make the best prints is to produce profiles that optimize the paper and to have the window into that image be calibrated so that what you see is what you get throughout the entire workflow. That's a long-winded answer to a simple question.
We have just time for one more quick question, Vincent, and that is, Stephen Morley wanted to know, do you have an infrared book in the works? Is that something that you're currently working on?
I am working on an infrared ebook, and I'm working on an infrared tutorial through Acme Educational that I've built an app for, and what I'm trying to do is engineer about 2 months worth of time so that I can update via video tutorial Oz to Kansas to 3.0, in which I will look at a couple of black and white conversion techniques that got edited out of the book, because with paper books you're limited to the galley size, so they work in multiples, you know, of 244. They have these multiples that they work in, and you can't exceed because of the economics of the book. So what I want to do is update for CC the Oz to Kansas 3.0 tutorials, and then I'm going to produce a tutorial called In the Heat of the Light, Coming to Therms with digital infrared photography. And I'm just going to specifically look at digital infrared workflow towards building a chromatic grayscale image. There are all the different ways, you know, swap color, this, that, you know, false color, channel swapping. That's great, and I believe I'll look at those things. I don't necessarily think I need to go into the nuts and bolts of how infrared works at a granular level, because if you've made it to the point where you have a modified infrared camera, I believe that you have done enough research that you have a reasonably decent understanding of what's going on. The thing that I hope to do in that ebook is to go over the misconceptions that I see occur as I have moved through doing infrared since 2003. And some of the misconceptions that I used to have that I learned were not correct, and I want to make sure that I address those. But then it's going to be the technique that I do and how to do it, and the actions that I have built specifically for that. I hope that answers your question, because there's no such thing as a short answer for me, apparently, today.
Well, I think that's about all we have time for today, Vincent. So I just want to thank you for your time today, and just to remind participants that we will send a link out to a recording of today's broadcast within about 24 hours. The additional questions, Vincent, I will forward them to you. If you have any opportunity to address them, I can make sure that they're shared back with the audience.
I will do my best.
Great. So that's it. That concludes today's broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.